I'm Maddie with Inspired Leather, and today I'm going to show you how to make your own ghost pincushions like these using the Inspired Leather Pincushion Kit. Now, a couple of things to know before we get going. This video is going to show you how to make your pincushions step by step. Down right over here, you're going to see that there are chapters noted along the way. So if at any point you need to stop making your pincushion and start up again later, you can easily get to the point where you left off using those chapters. Also, down in the description box, you're going to find the links with the chapters as well. One thing that you're gonna want to make sure to note that's down in there is that if any point you find yourself running out of thread and have to restart a stitch, the links to those sections are going to be down in the description box. And you'll find both the cross stitch and the saddle stitches down in there. And really, above all else, just have fun while you're making your pincushion creations. Let's talk about what comes in your kit. So you're going to get the main ghost piece and a white piece with black dots on that, and those are going to be the eyeballs that go behind the head. You're also going to get the bottom piece that is going to allow you to stuff it with the fluff that also came in your kit. 2 needles and waxed thread. In addition, you are going to need a pair of scissors or snips and a lighter so that way you can melt the thread when we get to that point. So we're going to begin with these 2 pieces. So what I would like you to do is measure the thread that you're going to need. And the way you're going to do that is you're going to measure around the eyepiece 4 times. So that's 1, 2, and 4. And then I'm just going to leave a little more to get it on my needle. So grab your needle and we are going to thread it, and then to lock the thread on here so that way it doesn't come off, we're going to pierce the thread at the very top in half, just like that. Pull it down, and now you have a knot. Do that to both ends. Now you can see I have needles on both ends of my thread. Take this piece. On the back you're going to see a little black arrow, and you're going to want to line it up with the hole there. So what I'd like to do is, at this point, put your needle in that hole that the arrow's pointing to, and then put it through the other side. And then we're just going to take that same needle that we just pulled through, and we're going to put it through the next set of holes. Okay. And let's flip it around, because at this point it's going to look like this. Now grab that bottom thread right here. We're going to pull this thread a little out of the way, and we're going to put this needle right through the same exact hole and tighten. And that is called a saddle stitch. So we're going to continue all the way around the eyes to secure this piece onto our ghost. Make sure that you pull your thread taut so that way your threads lay nice and flat. You don't want to pull them too tight. You don't want to cut into the leather pieces, but you do want to make sure that you are pulling them so that they are pretty snug. At this point, we've stitched all the way around the eyes, and what we need to do is finish off the stitch. So we are going to back stitch. So we're just going to reverse our stitch, so that way both of the needles are in the back, but you want to make sure that you're moving both needles through a back stitch. This stitch is actually one of the strongest stitches that you can use when you're hand sewing leather. What's really nice about it is that if one of these little loops right here, one of these threads are cut and compromised, the rest of the threads will not unravel. They will hold tight. Okay, so we have back stitched. We're going to snip our threads, and now we're going to melt these down. Okay. If at any point during your saddle stitch you find that you're running a little low on thread, I'm going to show you how you can stop this by back stitching and then restart the stitch after you've rethreaded your needles. So first what we want to do is we want to secure this stitch by back stitching. So we are simply going to pull these needles back through the holes. The same way like when we were going forward. And we're going to make sure that both of the needles land on the bottom side of our project. In this case, the black side. Okay, so now that is back stitched. Trim and melt those ends. Okay, and now grab your rethreaded needles, and we are going to start in the same exact hole where we left off. And keep on doing your saddle stitch from here on out. And we'll do a couple of stitches here so that way you can see what it looks like. And this is what it's going to look like. You'll see the two thicker stitches where you back stitched and secured that stitch, and then where you carried on. The next step we are going to move to is sewing these slits right here. Now this is one of the trickier parts because as we sew, we're going to have to pull these down to meet this bottom row right here. And we'll do that on both ends. Okay, so go ahead and measure out your thread for this area using the rule of 4. And then some extra length for your needles. Put your needles on both ends of the thread, and we're going to start from this end, but we're going to start on the back. So go ahead and place your needles through both holes across from each other at the beginning of that slit there. And we're going to pull that through. Flip it over. Make sure that your thread is even. And then we're going to put the needles through the opposite holes now. and this is how you start the cross stitch. From this point on, we're going to sew little X's on the back and dashes on the front. So make the X with your thread on the back. And then in the front, we're going to make that dash by putting the needles in the opposite holes. Okay, and make sure that you're pulling this so that it's snug. I like to hold my last stitch as I'm sewing it to help keep these pieces lined up. So again, there's the X on the back. Flip it over and put the needles in the opposite holes to create your dash on the front. And pull it tight. And repeat for the rest of the holes on this little flap. So now that we're at this point, we've got this piece sewn down. We need to bring this other side down, and we're going to sew it along there. And this is the tricky part because it can be a little tricky just to maneuver that piece in place. And so go ahead and crisscross it on the back the way we were before. Flip it. Place your needles in the opposite holes. And pull it in. And make sure that your thread is snug. Okay, so this is what it looks like at this point. Continue sewing. Okay, and so we have one more stitch here. You see that there's a hole here, and we are going to bring it right into the one that connects into the eye. Okay, so that's what it looks like from the front. To finish this, we need to knot our threads on the back. Okay, so take your needle and put it back through the closest thread to it. Flip your needle back up and put it through that hoop. You now have a little tiny knot at the end there. Do that to the other side. Cut your thread short, and then you want to melt the ends down. Didn't quite get that one. There. And that's the traditional way to finish your cross stitches, and they're not going to budge from that. And that's what the front looks like. So now we need to do this row, and I'll show you my little cheater method for finishing this one. Okay, so my thread is getting a little short at this point, so let me show you how to finish off a stitch and pick right back up. At this point, I am going to do my cheater method, which just involves tying a knot at the end. Now I do it I like to do a double knot. Now, when I do this, I primarily use this little cheat when I know that the inside of my project is not going to be seen. So because this is a pincushion that does have a bottom, it's going to be completely enclosed and stuffed. I'm not worried about how these knots look right here. Here you can see that I've missed 2 sets of holes on the front, so I'm just going to rethread my needles with a little more thread, and we're going to pick back up where we left off. Okay, so I'm going to move to the next set of holes. Just sink my needles right in there. Okay, that looks good. One more set. Now finish off this row using either of the knotting methods that I showed you. Now you can see our ghost is starting to take some shape. Now we are going to sew these 2 slits right here. And so we are going to close them up by bringing them together using the same cross stitch that we just used. So we're going to do these one at a time, starting from this end and coming down. Okay. So just like before, we're going to start at the bottom. We're going to put our needles into the holes through the bottom, pull it through to the front. Make sure that your thread is even. Okay. And then reverse the needles through the holes. And that's how we're starting our cross stitch. So cross stitch down the rest of the row. And I'm going to bring it down one more to where it's going through the same exact holes that these other stitches went through. You see that? Tie your knots and do the other side. And this is what your pincushion looks like at this point. We're going to ignore the center crease right there, and we are going to move on to the side slits here. So we are going to do the same thing. So using a cross stitch, we're going to start from this end, and we're going to come in and end at this end on both sides. So grab your threaded needles, and let's begin at the outside, and we're going to take it in. Now the reason why I like to start from the outside and go in like this is because when we do go to finish up that very last seam, we're not going to have to contend with any knots or threads kind of hanging out over the edges. We can just sew it right up, and it'll make it a little bit cleaner. Don't forget to pull your threads snug. You don't want them tight. You don't want the thread to bite into the leather. I'll show you what I mean here. So this is a nice snug pull, right? But if I pull it too tight, you can see that it starts to bend the leather a bit. I don't want that. It'll distort your final product. So just make sure that they're snug, that you're bringing the two edges together as you sew, but don't pull them too tightly. So now you can see how our ghost is starting to come together, and it's looking pretty cute. The next step is that we are going to have to close up this entire back seam right here. And this is the trickiest part, just because we need to get into this little tight area down inside here. Okay, so we are going to start by sinking our needles down into the first two holes, like that. Pull it through. Make sure your thread is even. Okay, now begin your cross stitch. And remember, you want to pull the thread as you're sewing along this curve so that these pieces start to close up, but you don't want to make them too tight. See how that's starting to close up nicely? It's looking really nice. Okay. Okay, now you can see here I've got 4 more holes. However, I'm going to stop sewing at the next set of holes that I have to sew. I'm going to leave this very last row empty, and I'll capture that when I sew the bottom on. Okay, so tie your knots. Okay, so this is what the ghost looks like on the inside. And this is what it looks like on the outside. Okay, so go ahead and grab that bottom piece. Now, this piece is pretty flexible, so this would be good to sew with. However, some of the dyes do really stiffen up this leather to a point where it's not really malleable. So if that's the case with yours, grab a cup of water, quickly dip it in, and bring it out and dry your leather. Don't leave it in that water. This is going to soften it up significantly. You can see how soft it is now. Now, as you're sewing this on, I want you to be careful because it is so much softer. It's easy to pull the thread too tight and tear right through the holes. Now, flipping your pieces over, you're going to see that there are 2 black dots. There are 2 black dots on this piece right here, and they correspond with the 2 black dots there. So what I like to do with this point is place your needles through the black dots on that bottom piece here. Drop it down into your pincushion and then put those needles through the corresponding black holes, little black dots. And pull your thread through, and now we're going to saddle stitch all the way around, picking up that piece and kind of turning that bottom piece as needed. Again, be careful that you're not pulling your threads too tight because you don't want to damage the leather. Okay, so at this point you can see it's getting a little harder to match up my holes. So I am going to just lift this bottom piece up and I'm going to set it on the top like that so I can continue sewing these holes a little easier. Now don't sew it completely closed because remember, we do have to leave a hole for Fluff. There's that seam that we left open at that very bottom, and now we're going to close that up. Okay, so this is where I'm going to stop, and I'm going to go ahead and start putting my fluff down into that hole. Now I like to pack the fluff in pretty tightly. So get as much fluff as you can down into that little body. Okay, that's where I'm gonna stop. Okay, and continue sewing around. Close up your ghost, and then don't forget to do your back stitches with your stitches ending on this side and not the front side. Okay, so I just finished my saddle stitch. Now I'm going to back stitch, making sure to leave my thread down at the bottom. Melt your thread. Okay. Now don't worry about your leather. It will dry back up hard. And doesn't it look cute? Now this is the last step that I like to take. It's totally optional, but sometimes I end up with little fluff just kind of hanging out everywhere. And so I just quickly burn it away. And it's all gone. Be proud of yourself. You just made your own leather pincushion.